Welcome to Positive Disintegration, a path to authenticity. In this episode, Chris and I are doing something a little bit different. This is an introduction to Positive Disintegration, which has been created specifically for the 2024 Dabrowski Congress this year. It's a little bit of a primer course, if you will, for some of the concepts in the theory. But remember, Positive Disintegration is more than a theory, it's an experience. So this isn't a scholarly presentation, but it is a more relaxed conversation, one for the layperson who might be going through that experience. In the notes, you'll find a video version of this, and if you want to find out more, I encourage you to join us at the Dabrowski Congress, which will be held July 11 to 13. It's not too late to register. Go to dabrowskicenter.org and find the tab for the Dabrowski Congress 2024, and you can register to join us online.
So our goal with this video is to educate the public about Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration in a nutshell, without going too far into the weeds. We're not going to give all of the details of the theory, and we're not going to talk about it in the way that it has been historically talked about in the past. This is our modern take on it, based on our deep understanding of it and our experience for almost 3 years as podcasters together, who have not only explored it together, but with other people, living it and applying it in practice. And so this is sort of a culmination of all of that experience and understanding and knowledge, but it's also something that has been done prior to the Congress in the past. Typically, before the Dabrowski Congress starts in earnest, there is a Dabrowski 101 session that people can attend and get an understanding of the theory if they're unfamiliar or new to it. And so our goal with this video and episode is to create this educational experience for people who are kind of new to it. Or maybe you've been around a long time and you wonder where we land on the major concepts of the theory. So that's our goal for today.
It is. And part of the reason why we want to talk about it in a slightly different way is not only to translate something which was, let's face it, written decades ago, and translate it to a modern context, but also to make it a little bit more accessible for people who are new to the theory and coming to it.
I'm Dr. Chris Wells. I am president of the Dabrowski Center and co-host of the Positive Disintegration podcast with Emma, and I'm a writer. You can check out my work on Substack. Happy to be here.
And I'm Emma Nicholson, and I'm vice president of the Dabrowski Center and co-host of the Positive Disintegration podcast with Chris. Funny that. And I also write content for my website, Tragic Gift, and make videos for my YouTube channel, Adults with Overexcitabilities, aiming to give people that beginning introduction to overexcitabilities and the theory.
We've been talking about making this for a while, and so it feels good to finally be trying to do it, and yet I felt a little nervous coming into it because it's a big task to talk about the theory, and especially to do it well in a nutshell.
Yeah, you feel like you're kind of boiling the ocean, but I think back to when we first did our first podcast episode and we were struggling to explain things, and I think the more you do it, the more practice you get at it. So hopefully we're in a good position now to be able to do this.
Hopefully. Yeah, it shouldn't be like it was when we did episode 1 of the podcast. No, we've learned. Well, let's kick it off. Well, let's start with the background. The theory of positive disintegration was created by Dr. Kazimierz Dabrowski, who was Polish. He was born in 1902. He was a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and his theory really came from a deep understanding and exploration of suffering. His early research explored the psychological conditions of suicide and the psychological basis of self-mutilation. He was really an incredible person, just so well-rounded, as I've already mentioned. So medical degree, PhD in psychology, was, an educator, knew about, like, was cultured, knew so much about so many topics, clearly was a playwright, wrote poems, just, in my opinion, a visionary, saw the positive developmental implications of nervousness and psychoneurosis at a time when his contemporaries considered it mental illness. And so really, positive disintegration, his theory, is a forerunner to the neurodiversity movement now in some ways, because back then he was challenging mainstream psychiatry and the pathology paradigm.
I think one of the cool things about him is even when he's talking about psychological tension, not necessarily being a sign of mental illness, but being a normal and necessary reaction to what's going on inside you and what's going on in the world around you, and that being a tool to help you change and grow. Those sentiments only now are starting to be adopted, and even in mental health spheres, we're still seeing sort of big emotions as a bit of a taboo, but he completely recognized that sometimes big emotions are a normal thing. And not only that, but they are the necessary agents that you need to get your ass into gear and work towards your own development, which I think is great. And he knew about that, not just because of his experience and his education, but his personal experiences. Like, he had seen suffering and he knew what it was all about. So I think he was coming from, as you said, a very unique place, but it was a revolutionary place as well.
It totally was, yeah. So yeah, his early work in the 1930s, he talked about nervousness. Overexcitabilities came from nervousness. And nervousness and overexcitability predated Dabrowski. He didn't coin the term overexcitability, but he did differentiate it into 5 types. And he saw that people with overexcitabilities have a very intense experience of reality. It's a heightened sensitivity and lowered threshold to stimuli, both internally and externally.
Yeah, it's that extra strong response to stimulus. So everything that's in the outside world and everything that's in your inner world. It's basically like having the volume on your mental amplifier turned up to 11 the entire time. And he sort of said that gave people a different view on the world and a different experience of reality. And I kind of liken it to if someone's head is like a nightclub, there's things going on, there's music, there's lights, there's people. Some people's nightclubs are a bit chill, others are a bit more pumping, and, the mood can vary. And someone with overexcitabilities, it's like their head's like a heavy metal concert. So there's music and there's lights and there's people, but on a huge scale. And when you compare the two, you wouldn't even say that the two things are the same sort of night out. But that's kind of what it's like when you are living in this state of intense, heightened sensitivity all the time. And particularly emotionally, it means that we're experiencing emotions on a very deep, loud, rich level.
Well, if you have so there's 5 types, and you don't necessarily have all 5 types. There's 5 types, and not everybody has all 5. They're emotional, imaginational, intellectual, sensual, and psychomotor.
If you think about those 5 areas being on high alert all the time, that's kind of what it looks like.
Right. Well, we talked about overexcitabilities in episode 2 of the podcast, and one of the things that we mentioned in our discussion was that there is a table of forms and expressions of overexcitability, and so that is one of the resources we'll provide in the show notes, and in the description of this video. We'll provide links and resources to the things that we're talking about. And so if you look at the table of manifestations, you'll see all of the ways that the 5 types look. And the overexcitabilities are an important part of developmental potential in the theory, which is one of the key concepts that you should know. And developmental potential includes the overexcitabilities. It also includes special talents and abilities that you may have, intelligence, and it includes the capacity for inner transformation. And what that means is that you have the nuclei of multilevelness, which is another key concept of the theory. The components of developmental potential interact with each other. And so it also, so it's like a combination too of these hereditary constitutional components of you, which overexcitability fall into, as well as, your cognitive abilities and stuff like that, but also whether you have indicators of dynamisms. And overexcitabilities are the raw materials that can produce dynamisms, which are the shapers of development in the theory.
I think it's important to call out that it doesn't mean that positive disintegration or inner transformation is limited to a certain audience, but it does mean that there are certain people out there who are more likely to naturally or accidentally tumble down the rabbit hole. And I think that's an important point, that we don't want to cut off the experience of positive disintegration, because it can happen to many people.
Yes. You made me think of the episode with David Sweeney where he talks about, I think it's there, where he talks about Elizabeth saying that, we're doomed to develop, right? If you have a strong developmental potential, you are going to collide with your environment as a child. You have this intense experience of reality, and dynamisms can emerge in children, and children go through positive disintegration. It's not only for adults. That's right. And like you said, you shouldn't think of developmental potential as something that's limiting, like, oh, I don't have it. I don't have the right combination of it, so I guess I can't develop. No, that's not the way to think about it. Even if Dabrowski himself did consider some people having more developmental potential than others, I think that's something we know now in modern times, is that anybody can develop under the right conditions. And so we would never say, like, no, you're not going to go through positive disintegration because you don't have it. Again, like you said, it's that the people who do have it are more likely to go through it young.
The other concept you brought up that we want to talk about is multilevelness. Now, this is almost like the how of development.
Yeah. Well, so Dabrowski believed that all developmental phenomena could be viewed through a prism of levels. And he said different types of development. He talked about 5 types of development that typically people talk about as 5 levels of development: a unilevel integration, a unilevel disintegration, and then 2 levels of multilevel disintegration, and then a multilevel integration. But we want to talk about them as 5 types of development.
I think part of the reason why we don't like saying the word levels is because of the modern context that we have around the word level. Like, let's face it, those of us who have played video games before know that we see levels as a progressive thing. So, particularly when development can come in cycles, talking about the types of development is very important, because you can go through them multiple times.
It's really important to understand that this is not a stage theory. It's non-ontological, which means it doesn't naturally unfold in the lifespan for everybody in the same way. Not everybody experiences it. Not everyone experiences it on the same timeline. Some people experience it as children. Some people experience it as adolescents. Some people don't go through positive disintegration until menopause or middle age or after. Some people never experience positive disintegration. And so I think it's really critical to know that there's no linear timeline for this that you can expect. It's different for everybody. It's extremely individual.
So, Chris, I wanted to ask you, what is it particularly about this concept of multi-levelness that makes it very important to personality growth?
He meant that there's a higher and a lower. There is a hierarchy of values. And so values are another critical key component or concept in the theory and how they look. If you are in a multi-level disintegration, you have a hierarchy of values. You are in a vertical process where you're able to see the higher versus the lower in yourself in situations. If you're in a unilevel disintegration or integration, that hierarchy is not there. And so it actually makes it harder to resolve a disintegration if you don't have that hierarchy, because you don't see a clear path out of your suffering. But like even the title of his book, Multi-Levelness of Emotional and Instinctive Functions, shows like where he was in his thinking around all cognitive processes, the types of disintegration, the overexcitabilities, all are seen through this prism of levels in the theory. What can you add to that?
Yeah, the multi-levelness of values for me stands out, because this is really what when you're saying higher path and lower path, we're thinking about what is actually more like you and what is less like you. So not what you're taught by everybody else, but what makes sense to you as a value. What do you really think is the right thing to do, the right way to behave towards others? As you were saying before, the importance of relationships. Everything we do in the world is interacting with other people, and this is really important. So if we don't have that hierarchy of values, if we haven't figured out what is really important and what is the right thing to do within ourselves, not what we're told, you're right, it's really hard to see a way forward, even just in life, let alone out of a period of emotional turmoil. We need to have that established and do it through a bit of self-reflection to find that way forward. So I think it's really a key concept in the theory, because it's when mess really starts turning into some kind of order, and then you've got the hard work after that to figure out how to follow that sense of order.
That's right. And so he talked about own forces or autonomous forces within us, and the emergence of the hierarchy of values is the point where the third factor is active. And, I really wanted to stay away from a lot of like the lingo of the theory, but we would be remiss to not talk about the third factor. He talked about it as a factor of development and as a dynamism. And so the broader factor of development type is set against two other factors, which would be the constitutional, hereditary. This is kind of what we're born with. But not only what we're born with, but like the conditions of our birth, the conditions of pregnancy for our mom, these things all matter to who we are and who we, how we develop when we're little. And so then you have the second factor, which is the social environment. And so you can see that like our genetics, the conditions of our birth and environment, all of these things combine to, make us who we are when we're young. The third factor is set apart from them. This is who we choose to be. This is like the dynamisms that emerge that become this third factor of development, not just the third factor dynamism. This is what shapes us into our personality ideal.
And so,
I mean, that's what the theory.
Just to play that back to you, I see the first and second factor as almost like what we colloquially know as like the nature-nurture kind of thing. We see that in arguments. So the factors of who you are biologically, let's say the circumstances of your birth, and your environment around you. And people would be kind of familiar with that nature-nurture discourse, making up who you are. But then there's the third factor, which you describe as almost like a choice, a conscious choice to be something else, to overcome that. And for me, that is part of that multi-levelness is, moving away from those first two factors and seeing that you can choose another path for yourself, and you can decide for yourself through self-discovery and reflection who it is that you want to be, and find your own path.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the third factor of development is the totality of the dynamisms of multi-level disintegration, right? And so, or multi-level development. So, the third factor is there when there's evidence of the dynamisms present. That's how we know there is a third factor in somebody. So, the third factor dynamism is, really just is one of the guides of development that is you making the choices and acting. What is more like me? Who do I want to be? Like affirming the things about yourself that you want to develop, and you're rejecting and letting go of the parts of yourself that you don't identify with anymore, that isn't who you really are.
So, Chris, we're talking about this sort of defining who you are and this hierarchy. And that kind of leads us to the two types of disintegration that there are, because you said there's a unilevel and a multilevel, and you talk about dynamisms. So can you share with us a little bit about what a dynamism is and how they fit into those two processes?
So unilevel development, it's ahierarchical. There's no hierarchy of values. Everything is taking place on one plane of experience without a clear higher versus lower. And there are only 3 dynamisms in unilevel disintegration. The unilevel dynamisms lack consciousness. They don't lead to increased self-awareness. They often lead to somatic issues. They can lead to addiction. They don't have clear channels out of suffering. There are many more multi-level dynamisms than unilevel ones, and you can see them more as spurs to self-correction. They're uncomfortable. They can be very painful. They bring you a sharp, kind of brutal awareness of where you're screwing up and where you're off track, and strong dissatisfaction with yourself. You realize that you are not where you need to be. You realize that, or like positive maladjustment, you are in a situation that you have to make a tough ethical choice. You realize that you have to speak up about something, or you have to act against the grain. You have to, take a stand against something because it's not right. That's positive maladjustment. Sometimes children are positively maladjusted to their parents or school, and it seems like there's something wrong with the child, when in fact, if you really carefully scrutinize what's happening, you can see that they are simply reacting against an environment that isn't right for them.
So with unilevel disintegration, we're basically in the mess phase, and you said it's all ahierarchical, so you don't have that up and down, that higher or lower yet. It all just sort of sits in one puddle of mess. And the dynamisms, or the forces that are sort of at work in us, aren't really giving us any sort of clear direction. But then we move to multi-level, you said we get these spurs to self-correct. So we get these feelings and forces within us, and whether we start talking about, the big emotions and stuff that are pretty unpleasant, that show us those higher and lower levels of who we ought to be. And when you're talking about positive maladjustment, sort of bucking the status quo, I guess you have to be able to see a better way within yourself to how things are being done externally in order to sort of feel that way, that there's something not right with the world rather than not right with you.
Right. And so in the unilevel disintegration and those dynamisms, it's like ambivalence is like fluctuation or hesitation, or, well, I know that I should stop doing this thing, but I can't. Like it's being stuck. It's like self-sabotage. It's getting in your own way. It's making choices you shouldn't make. It's just, like there's no clear pathway. It can lead to all kinds of somatic ailments, headaches, stomach aches. Like I'm thinking of when I was a kid and oh, I have a stomach ache every day at school. Well, because when you hate the environment you're in, but you maybe don't have the awareness yet to understand like what it is that's causing you to feel so upset in it, then your body takes it out, on you. Like your body like plays it out. So, and then the second factor is a dynamism in unilevel disintegration that is like you are worried about what other people think of you. You're looking to other people for what you should do. You're
Following the leader, basically.
You're following the leader. I'm
crowd.
trying to think of, you're following the crowd. You're not doing your own thing. That's right.
Whereas
So,
doing your own thing is then where you go into the third factor. And then that makes kind of the difference. But I guess there's a gap there between, feeling inside like you can see this level of values and maybe see where your inner compass is kind of pointing, but actually following that as an action, because that does take a bit of bravery to kind of march to the beat of your own drum, right?
it's true. I think it's really important to say that the early multi-level dynamisms are spontaneous. He called the first multi-level phase of disintegration spontaneous multi-level disintegration. So that shows you that it's not something that you're creating in yourself. It's something that spontaneously arises and happens. And astonishment with oneself and disquietude. I really want to say too about these early dynamisms that they're disintegrating. So the unilevel dynamisms, especially ambivalences and ambitendencies, are disintegrating. They're leading you into the disintegration. They're leading you into what feels like internal chaos. When people do start experiencing unilevel disintegration, it feels like a crisis. You wonder what is wrong with you. Are you losing your mind? But the early multi-level phase of disintegration also can feel like you're losing your mind and you start to question your own sanity. That feeling of disquietude, oh my God, who am I? Like what? But like you wonder, you question yourself, you question your sanity. It's surprising. It's astonishing to you. What have I done? And then you may feel extremely dissatisfied. You may hate yourself and feel disgusted with yourself. You may feel guilt and shame. All of these are early multi-level dynamisms, and they are painful. They often lead people to seek mental health treatment.
I see those two as, so the unilevel stuff is like chaos because you don't know what weighs up, right? Whereas the multi-level stuff is like pain and suffering, because you can see now that you stuffed up, right? You can see that you've done something wrong. You feel guilty, but no one asks to feel guilty. No one deliberately goes out to seek to feel guilty, right? As you said, it's spontaneous. It happens to you. You do something, you go, oh shit, and you've got this emotional, I guess, understanding that whatever you've done is the lower path and not the higher path. And so to me, it's like chaos and pain. So you move from, as you said, that freak out of, am I falling apart, towards, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. Oh, I'm falling apart still. But, so it's that multi-level shift that makes the difference, but that doesn't make it any easier.
It doesn't. And it would be a mistake to think that there's necessarily one clear multi-level shift or that there won't be many multi-level shifts that are kind of incremental. It's possible to move into a multi-level disintegration that doesn't actually carry you into an integrated place. It's possible to give up on yourself and seek answers again from other people or outside of yourself. When you're constantly looking externally for the answers, you're in a unilevel place. I think it's a tough thing to say but it's true. When you start to find the answers within, when you start to trust that you have the capacity to come up with your own methods of personal growth and development, then you're in a multi-level place. And that's where you have this fertile ground with these dynamisms to shape yourself.
And that's the important part out of the pain, right? Is to do that self-reflection, do the work, start correcting behavior. Because if you're continually feeling those spurs for correction and you ignore them and just keep plowing ahead, it's going to keep hurting. So the important part of this is once we've started to see that higher and lower, we've got to figure out how to act on that.
Right. And so when we think about the dynamisms as not only spurs to self-correction, but the tools for rebuilding and the tools for becoming an integrated human, that's why they're so valuable. And well, using the word valuable, values are essential in the theory. They are the path out of the suffering and the disintegration. It's that process of emotionally discovering your hierarchy of values. And I say emotionally because it is that in that spontaneous phase of multi-level disintegration, it's powered by your overexcitabilities. It's powered by that combination, especially of emotional, intellectual, and imaginational overexcitabilities that provide the channel and the pathway out. If you can trust, and if you can trust in yourself, and if you can, if you can use these painful experiences to shape yourself, discovering in ourselves higher levels of development, higher tendencies and sensitivities, we simultaneously create them. I mean, that is how the hierarchy of values works. Like, we discover these things in ourselves. We discover by screwing up in our relationships who we want to be and what kind of a person we want to become. Like, it's these mistakes that we make in our lives that we can learn from and grow from. But not everybody does. A lot of people, they end up either medicating it away with alcohol or drugs, or they're just unable to look at these painful things. I mean, I think that we've all had that experience of not being able to own up to something we've done that we know has hurt someone else. Maybe later we can in our lives face it again. But I think it's natural when you're, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Like, you don't want to say like when you're younger or when you're older, but I mean, maturity is a natural part of this process. And when we're early on in it, and I guess that does kind of go with when you're younger, then you still have a lot to learn. And it may be easier to deny reality and deny the pain that you've caused or the suffering that you've caused for other people and look away. But as you grow in your development, you are better able to be accountable, take responsibility for yourself, take responsibility for your mistakes and grow from them and make amends and do the right thing.
It's really important because I think what you're touching on here is some people might be listening to this and thinking, well, how can't you figure out what's right and wrong? That sounds pretty damn easy, doesn't it? You just do the right thing. It's not. Humans have developed so many ways to avoid listening to the inner compass in their own heart. It is ridiculous. We disassociate from stuff. We justify our actions. We look to what other people are doing as a justification for our actions. People point the blame at others. As you said, they self-medicate. They hide in their work. They hide in their hobbies. They try and distract themselves. They try and push the pain down and think, well, I don't want to be mentally ill, so I better put a smile on, right, and pretend everything's cool. Even when people are feeling like they don't fit in with the way the world is for various reasons. We hide ourselves. We mask ourselves. We hide in closets. We do all sorts of things to deny who it is that we really are or to justify how we're behaving today in the world that it's ridiculous. So if you're thinking to yourself that, figuring out your values or rediscovering them is quite easy and acting on them is easy, it's not, because that's not how people behave.
That's right. We have so many ways of fooling ourselves. Like, our minds protect us in some ways from being hurt. Like, I feel like I'm not saying that right, but I'm thinking of Michael's paper about Eleanor Roosevelt, because it's this phrase, protective veiling, that she uses in one of these quotes, where we have endless ways of deceiving ourselves and denying the truth about any situation. I mean, it's too simple for people to do that. So if there's a spontaneous multi-level disintegration, there's also an organized or directed multi-level disintegration. And that is the one where the dynamisms are less emotionally charged, they're more cognitively oriented, and they are more about facilitating the process of transformation compared to creating the disintegration and the painful spurs to self-correction.
And part of the reason why it's called organized is because as you said, it's conscious, but there's more of a level of you now have control over this. When we're talking about the third factor of making choices, this is about making choices for yourself that maybe are against everything that you've been taught or learnt before. This is about doing the work to ensure that you are walking your talk in alignment with this new discovery of your values. So I think they're really important, because the theory not only describes the mess and the chaos and the painful parts and the spurs to correction, it also describes how we can then take control of that mess and transform it into who we ought to be.
Right. Right. And so, again, like, the overexcitabilities are the material that make up dynamisms. Like, these processes can unfold and develop, and overexcitabilities can be transformed into, like, these actual tools for growth. That's what's so beautiful about it. It's this, I mean, like, I feel like these are more of the quotes that I put in here, right? Crises are periods of increased insight into oneself, creativity, and personality development. I mean, when I was young, like, before I learned about the theory, it never occurred to me that crises in my life could actually have these elements that could also lead me out of them. If I, like you said, like, you do have to trust in yourself. And I mean, in some ways, I think you have to shut out what other people are telling you. But I don't know if I wouldn't want to leave that, but you do.
Yeah,
I mean, like, not everybody has good advice in their life.
When you talk about, particularly overexcitabilities and tension, like, when you're in crisis, you don't see your big painful emotions as a helpful thing to point you in the right direction. You don't see your continual self-rumination when it's got no direction as being a helpful thing. It just drives you around in negative mental circles, right? And you don't see your imagination when it's playing out worst case scenarios for you and making you paranoid as a good thing. But then when you get to a point of taking control of your development, you can see these big emotions as a helpful pointer to show you what the right path is. You can use your imagination to think about how you could be doing things better, and you can use your intellectual overexcitability to self-examine and self-reflect. And all those things, as you said, can be turned around. So the things that are causing the chaos aren't separate from the things that are helping you fix it. They are the same things. It's just that you transform them into tools. And in doing so, you can then use those tools to transform yourself.
That's right. That's right. And so that's part of the problem with the unilevel development or disintegration, is that these tools aren't accessible to you at that point. Although unilevel and multilevel disintegrations can coexist. If the disintegration is more unilevel, it lacks that conscious awareness and may never reach a point where there's a strong capacity for transformation. And that's like another quote that I had handy for this recording tonight was movement from what is to what ought to be opens a channel for resolution and direction of developmental tensions. When this channel is not open, as in unilevel disintegration, the tensions lead to severe psychosomatic illness, psychosis, or suicide. So this is kind of what's so critical about working with these multi-level dynamisms. Like when we recognize them in ourselves or we recognize them in someone else, it's important to cultivate them and to get to the point where you can direct your development. But let me tell you that saying this right now and living it and putting it into practice are two different things. I think a lot of what we talk about sounds so simple, like, oh, great. Well, okay, cool. Well, I feel guilt and shame and I'm very dissatisfied with myself. Like, I will just transform these into the organized dynamisms. Well, I mean, it's not that simple. And yet that capacity is within you. You can find it and activate these dynamisms in yourself.
Think of like, say to someone, run 5 miles down the street. Right? It sounds very simple. Just run down the street from it. Actually, running 5 miles down the street is quite difficult. So that's, I think, the thing with this theory is when you look at it, it does give us hope. And when you sort of boil it down, it does seem really simple. It's not, to execute it, to carry it out, it's quite painful. However, I think that when people do understand about this framework and they do understand the fact that if they form that hierarchy of values, it can show them way out, it is far better to have an answer that sounds simple and isn't that easy to carry out than to have no answer at all. Than to be told that the big emotions that you feel are a mental illness and you should just take a pill to get rid of it. To never face your demons and deal with them and continue to live in that pain. You know, to never resolve why you feel guilty about things or why your relationships keep falling apart and to get out of that cycle. Yeah, it's hard work to drag yourself out of the mud, but it's far better than sitting in the mud for the rest of your life.
Definitely. Yeah. It's like just listening to you say that just now, I mean, this is like a lifelong journey. It's not something that's neat and simple and quick. It can be years of disintegration, which I realize sounds daunting, but I think it's just the reality of it. And it's different, again, like I said, for everybody. And so it's so individual. My experience of disintegration is going to be different than your experience of disintegration, but it's meant to be a process of personal growth. And the secondary integration that is on the other side of these disintegrations also isn't necessarily just some stagnant place where you're like, oh, cool, I've reached the pinnacle of my development and now I can just rest and, I don't know, on my laurels or whatever. Like, you're still going to be working on developing yourself. You're still going to be, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know how, like, I don't want to make it sound like it's something that you're striving for as like an achievement, but growth continues. Growth continues. And even when you're in an integrated state, I think you still have this higher versus lower in yourself. You still have a sense of where you can go. And even when you're living your values, I don't know that there's not always some other place to go.
Yeah, I mean, life is always going to
I mean, I'm not there. Like, I don't know. I feel like, I feel like it's like disintegration after disintegration in my life personally. So,
but like, it does get easier. I don't ever think I'm going to see the end of it because life keeps chucking you curveballs, right? It keeps giving you new challenges and new
True.
situations and new people, and you have to learn things all over again. But B, I think, part of it is keeping up your fitness, I guess. So if we go back to that analogy of running the 5 miles, if you've never run before, like trying to get through a 5-mile run straight off the bat it's going to burn your lungs. It's going to be daunting. You're going to be sweating. You're going to be dehydrated. You're going to collapse at the end of it, and it's going to feel like shit. But the more you go through it and the more you do it, the fitter you get. But even when you've mastered your 5-mile run and done your personal best, you still don't stop training or else you're going to lose your fitness, right? So if we think about personality growth in the same way, that yes, it's hard to get started. Yes, it's hard to get out of the initial state of, an apathy and sloth and, do that first few tentative steps. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, but the more we keep plodding, the more accustomed that we become to it. Not that it's easy, but we grow stronger. And, once you know that you can do that 5-mile run, the next time you're hit with a challenge and you get to that start line, you're more confident and more capable, and you'll get to the finish line.
Dabrowski saw personality as an achievement. This isn't something you're born with. He wasn't talking about it in terms of preferences or like the MBTI. He was thinking, for him, personality was chosen, self-created. This was the developmental feat that is at the end of the process, that you have created who you are. It's not just about your habits or your preferences.
Or everything that everybody else has taught you who you are, or comparing yourself to others. It's carving yourself out of the materials through hard work.
Right. Even when overexcitabilities feel like something that's wrong with you or a problem, they can be transformed. We don't have to feel like we are doomed to be the way we are. We can tend our nervous systems and we can change our experiences of reality. Dabrowski talked a lot in his work about different levels of reality, and that some people with strong imaginational overexcitability, for instance, live in higher realities in their own minds. It's a different experience of reality than somebody who is just in, concrete reality, not in their imagination. So if we live in different realities, we can shape our realities and we can transform them. Like, we really can take control of our own development. And that's what this theory is all about. This is a theory for people who have a drive to develop. Not everyone does, and that's okay. But if you do, you're likely to see yourself in Dabrowski's words and theory and, maybe feel mirrored and in a really special way that you haven't from any other kind of psychological theory.
Particularly if you're prone to going through psychological tension, big emotions, feeling like you don't fit into the world.
Totally. That feeling of being an alien, the otherness. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to say that if you are interested in learning more about lived experience of positive disintegration, we've talked about it on the podcast. We've talked about it, our own experiences in episode 8. We've talked about it with other people. On our Substack, we have a directory post, and one of the themes is lived experience. That's just one place where you can find it. You can watch Emma's videos for more about her experience. And at the Congress, at the Dabrowski Congress in July, you will be seeing presentations of people's experiences developing through positive disintegration.
So you'll see even people like me talking about the messes and the pain that they've been through, yes, but also how the theory has helped them transform that into the tools to transform themselves. And I think it's going to be very powerful for anyone who does feel like maybe they're struggling, maybe they're in pain, maybe they don't fit into the world, maybe they are neurodivergent or gifted. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who feel like they don't fit or they're not getting along in the world who might come along to this Congress and hear stories from others about how we didn't feel like we fit either. We went through immense periods of pain, but we use this theory to get through it and to transform ourselves. And so I think, if you do feel like that, come and check us out at the Congress, because you may find other people just like you there to mirror.
Exactly. Yes. It's going to be great. I'm so excited about the sessions that we have lined up, and other resources are available too. Aside from the Congress, the Dabrowski Center website has resources. Our Substack has resources. Emma's website, Tragic Gift, her channel, Adults with Overexcitabilities, there's plenty there. I do want to mention before we end that I'm going to be launching a course in August called Dabrowski 101 that is a 6-month exploration in depth. So if this is the overview in a nutshell today, the Dabrowski 101 course will be a 6-month journey into it for people who are new to it. And then I'm also going to be doing a course called Dynamisms, Tools for Personal Growth. That is a very in-depth exploration of the dynamisms. So more to come about both of those by the Congress.
Well, I think a good place to finish is that final quote that you pulled up for us.
Do not run from yourself, but conquer yourself. Yes.
Right on.
That's right.
That seems to be the spirit of the theory.
It is the spirit of the theory. That's right. And that's from Chanin was Dabrowski's pen name. It's interesting to me that he even had to use a pen name because talking about his experiences of psychoneurosis and overexcitability and intensity too much for his contemporaries to handle, I'm sure. So
continue your path to authenticity through the links in the show notes. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter for stacks of cool things delivered straight to your inbox. Explore the Dabrowski Center, email us, or join us on social media. And don't forget to show your love by liking, subscribing, grabbing some positive Disintegration merch, or leaving us a rating or review on your podcast platform.